Types of betta fish: a guide on patterns, color and more. Searching for information about rare or unique betta breeds can be a frustrating proposition. Not because there's a dearth of information. It's actually the opposite problem. There are so many varieties of bettas that it's overwhelming for novice fish keepers. If you're trying to sort out the differences between bettas, it helps to have a primer like this one to refer to. Europeans have been breeding bettas for their bright, intricate colors and tail configurations for well over 100 years. When you add in some of the newer crosses coming out of Thailand, your options for the prettiest betta fish become rather dizzying. To avoid confusion, here's a detailed list of bettas, broken down by color, scale pattern, and tail type. Betta varieties. The ever-popular betta is practically the runway model of the freshwater fish trade. Male bettas are especially coveted by aquarists for their elaborate, flowing fancy tails, unique patterns, and vivid colors. Female bettas are also very pretty but lack the fancy fins and aggressive attitude. Betta fish are native to the Mekong Delta region of Southeast Asia, where they typically scrounge for insect eggs and larvae among the rice paddies and irrigation ditches. From the more than 70 species of wild bettas, breeders have selectively bred lines with unique traits, leading the massive variety of fish found in the aquarium trade. I hope to cover as many betta varieties as possible here, but the truth is I'll probably miss a few. Breeders are constantly announcing new varieties, and types that were rare a few years ago may now be found in big box pet stores. The situation is constantly evolving, and there are so many different types of betta it can be hard to keep up. Pet bettas: what species do you have? Before we can sink into the topic of betta varieties, it helps to understand a bit of the science behind betta classifications. You may remember hearing about the scientific classification system in your high school biology class. It's a huge and complicated way for biologists to explain how different living organisms are related to each other. At one end of the scale, we have really broad categories such as kingdom, phylum, and class. At the lower end we start to narrow down the relationships into smaller and tighter categories. These are the classification categories you'll probably recognize: genus, species, and subspecies or variety. What are betta splendens? The colorful and fancy type of betta you'll typically see available in pet stores and online aquarium shops is the betta splendens. Betta identifies the genus, and splendens as the species, in the same way that your pet dog can be identified by the genus and species Canis familiaris. If you have a betta fish, chances are it's a betta splendens, since that's the most popular type of domesticated betta available around the world. Betta splendens have a long and complicated history. We know that they've been bred for their aggression and fighting ability in their native regions for hundreds of years. That's how they've earned their nickname as the Siamese fighting fish. We rarely use the term subspecies when we're talking about fancy betta fish and usually opt for variety instead, but the terms mean the same thing. Your betta's variety will depend on their colors, patterns and/or tail configurations. Some varieties include the red-veiled tail betta and bicolored double-tail betta, for instance. They may be different varieties, but they're all the same species. How did pet bettas become so diverse? The long and fancy tails and vivid, flashy colors we think of when we hear betta were actually created by Europeans. Since the 1800s, collectors and hobby breeders on the continent have selectively bred generations with ever more diverse traits. Fancy betta fish are the descendants of mutants. These traits or physical characteristics may be inherited and passed down to the fish's offspring. But sometimes, something in the mixing of genetic material goes wrong. A mutation, or deformity, may appear spontaneously in a line and alter the appearance of the offspring unexpectedly. The double tail and elephant ear betta are great examples. Oftentimes, these fish are prone to other health problems, such as swim bladder disease, that may be related to their genetic mutation. Mutations in the wild are usually a bad thing, because they are either fatal, such as a fish born without a mouth, or because they make it harder for a wild animal to survive and/or breed. Fancy betta males, with those bright and flowing tails, would not likely survive in the wild today. But humans love to collect animals with odd-looking or unique appearances. That's how animals like pug dogs and munchkin cats made it into our living rooms. We pamper them, and then help them to spread their mutation to the next generation. It's the same for betta fish. Breeders collect and carefully manage their stock to produce a wide variety of colors, patterns and tail configurations. There's always a lot of excitement when a new inheritable mutation is discovered, even if these varieties of betta are more likely to develop health issues. Hybridization also introduces new traits. But mutation isn't the only way new betta traits get discovered. Over the centuries, breeders have also introduced new traits to their lines intentionally by breeding their fish back to wild stock. That's how the dragon scale betta came to be. Some of the rarer traits have been brought into the betta splendens fold by crossing domesticated bettas with select wild specimens who have the trait the breeder desires. The offspring, which are hybrids, hopefully inherit and pass the trait down themselves. But it's not always a smooth or straightforward process. Recent developments in betta breeding recently, breeders in Thailand have begun crossing wild betta splendens with their aggressive stock of Siamese fighting fish, resulting in new varieties of betta fish, like the placat. Some of these hybrid betta splendens varieties have become very popular in America. They may be rare or difficult to find, and often have slightly different behavioral characteristics than the traditional varieties. Varieties of bettas by color and pattern. So what makes a betta fish so colorful, anyway? Fish pigmentation is a complicated business. Here's a highly simplified version that will help you understand how color and scale patterns are related. Pigment cells determine betta color. There are three primary types of pigments, and they exist in special cells called chromatophores. Red, erythrin. Black, melanin. Yellow, xanthin. The color of a betta is partially determined by the combination of pigments expressed in their chromatophores, and how deeply under the scales the cells are. When the black and yellow pigments are expressed, for instance, a fish will appear brown. The deeper the chromatophores are under the scales, the darker and more vivid the color appears. Wild versus pet betta colors. Wild bettas are not generally as colorful as their selectively bred cousins, although there are some stunning exceptions. The pigment cells in wild bettas alter size and shape constantly, so the fish's appearance is ever-changing. Domesticated bettas' cells don't change as much, and so their colors are more stable. Wild betta only show their brightest colors when threatened or breeding, but domesticated varieties are always colorful unless they are sick or stressed. It's one of the traits that make domesticated bettas so desirable. How are color and scale patterns related? There are other types of cells that play a role in the color and pattern of your betta. They further alter the fish's appearance and create many of the patterns betta collectors find so desirable. Fish also have cells called erythrocytes, which give them a shiny, iridescent look. Depending on the depth of these cells, a fish may seem to have metallic highlights or stripes, or may even appear nearly white. Just to complicate things further, sometimes iridocytes and chromatophores combine to create new colors. If you take a xanthine-containing chromatophore and put it in an iridocyte, you'll end up with a metallic, shiny gold-colored fish. Diet and environmental factors to betta colors and patterns. The color and scale pattern of betta fish is dependent on their genetics, but it's also influenced by their diet and the environment in which they live. Since fish can't naturally produce pigments, they have to get them from their diet. To keep your betta looking their best, be sure to feed them a varied and high-quality diet, and keep their water sparkling clean. Their water temperature plays into this as well, so be sure your tank stays between 75 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Varieties of bettas by tail and fin configurations. The trait that makes the male betta stand out among other aquarium fish is his elongated tail. Female bettas are pretty, but have a duller color than the males and lack the elaborate tail or fins. So what's the story with male betta tail types? Long-tail bettas are different than short. Fish have several individual fins and a couple pairs of fins around their body, and bettas are no different. They use these fins to swim and orient their bodies in 3 dimensions underwater. Certain varieties of betta have been selected and bred for longer, wider or specially shaped fins. The tail, or caudal fin, is the most common fancy feature in rare betta fish. Their bottom or anal fin is another. Some varieties may have elongated or elaborate pectoral, dorsal or ventral fins as well. Why don't wild bettas have these traits? One hazard of elongated tails and fins is it hampers movement when swimming through vegetation. The fanciest and most beautiful betta fish would be at a severe disadvantage in the wild. I hope you enjoy watching this presentation. For my next video we will talk about the betta varieties, so please don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell of my next upload video. Thank you for watching.